The easiest way to destroy someone is to convince them they have nothing left to fight for. The judge's final words settled over the courtroom with the weight of cold stone, and for a long moment no one moved. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, stretching pale ribbons across the polished floor, while the quiet hum of the air conditioning became the only sound anyone could hear. Maya Brooks stood perfectly still beside the defense table, her fingers wrapped around the worn leather strap of a handbag she had owned for nearly 15 years. Inside that bag were exactly $300, a faded family photograph, and a handwritten recipe book that had belonged to her grandmother. Everything else had slipped away piece by piece. Across the room, Ethan Collins adjusted the cuff of his tailored navy suit before accepting a thick envelope from his attorney. The smile that crossed his face was polite enough to satisfy the courtroom, yet unmistakably triumphant. The house on Willow Creek Drive was now legally his. The SUV Maya had driven to school pickups for nearly a decade was now his as well. Temporary custody of 8-year-old Noah and 6-year-old Lily had also been awarded to him until the court reviewed the arrangement months later. Maya lowered her eyes for only a second, not because she was ashamed, but because she knew if she looked at her children too long, her composure might crack. Noah's small sneakers scraped softly across the floor as he instinctively took one uncertain step toward his mother. Lily reached out with both hands, her tiny fingers trembling as though she expected the distance between them to disappear if she simply tried hard enough. Before either child could move farther, Ethan rested a gentle hand on Noah's shoulder and quietly guided both children back beside him. It was not cruel. It was calm, orderly, and completely within the court's decision. Somehow, that hurt even more. Maya forced herself to smile anyway, the kind of smile only mothers understood, one carefully crafted to tell frightened children that everything would somehow be okay, even when she had no idea how. Noah's lips parted as if he wanted to say something, but the bailiff politely motioned for everyone to clear the aisle. The moment dissolved into silence. Outside, the bright North Carolina afternoon felt strangely indifferent. Cars rolled past the courthouse steps. Office workers carried paper coffee cups, and a light breeze scattered brown leaves across the concrete. Life continued without asking permission from broken hearts. Maya stepped into the sunlight carrying nothing except the handbag over her shoulder. Ethan emerged moments later with his attorney, confidently discussing paperwork and schedules. As he walked past Maya, he paused just long enough to glance at the aging purse hanging from her arm. $300 won't build much of a future, he said quietly before continuing toward the parking lot. Maya watched him unlock the SUV that used to hold soccer gear, grocery bags, and sleepy children after long weekends. Noah turned once through the rear window, pressing his palm gently against the glass until the vehicle disappeared around the corner. Maya remained on the courthouse steps alone. The breeze carried the scent of fresh asphalt from a nearby construction site, and somewhere across the street a food cart filled the air with the comforting aroma of grilled onions and warm bread. Her stomach reminded her she had not eaten since sunrise, yet she barely noticed. Instead, she slowly opened her handbag and counted the crisp bills one more time. $300. No home waiting for her. No car parked nearby. No children running into her arms that evening. Most people would have seen the end of a story. Maya Brooks quietly closed the bag, lifted her chin toward the fading afternoon sun, and took her first step forward without realizing she was already walking toward the life that would one day make the entire country learn her name. Maya walked until the courthouse disappeared behind rows of oak trees and brick office buildings, her heels growing heavier with every block. The afternoon sun slowly surrendered to long shadows stretching across the sidewalks, and the cheerful sounds of downtown slowly faded into the distant rush of traffic. She stopped beside a small bus shelter and finally allowed herself to sit. The metal bench felt cool beneath her hands, and for the first time all day, silence settled around her. She reached into her handbag again, not to count the money this time, but to unfold the old recipe notebook that had traveled with her through every apartment, every move, and every chapter of her adult life. The faded cover carried faint flour stains that had never completely disappeared. Inside were recipes written in careful cursive by her grandmother, Evelyn Brooks, who had believed every good meal carried enough love to heal someone having their worst day. Maya gently brushed her fingertips across one familiar page and smiled despite the tears gathering in her eyes. Before marriage, she had worked in a neighborhood diner where customers often requested her peach cobbler before they even looked at the menu. She remembered arriving before sunrise, tying on a simple apron, and greeting truck drivers, teachers, nurses, and construction workers by name. They never came only because they were hungry. They came because Maya remembered birthdays, favorite coffee orders, and the stories people carried behind tired eyes. After Noah was born, then Lily 2 years later, she chose to stay home. It was never a sacrifice in her heart. She believed raising her children was the most important job she could ever have. Years passed quietly, and while Ethan built his career, Maya built birthday cakes, school lunches, bedtime traditions, and countless ordinary moments that quietly became a family. Somewhere along the way, the world stopped seeing her as a chef and began seeing her only as someone who depended on another person. By early evening, the temperature had begun to cool, and Maya found herself standing outside a modest weekly motel on the edge of town. The manager slid a registration card across the counter without asking unnecessary questions. $105 for the night left her with even less than she had imagined, but she accepted the room key with gratitude. The room itself was small, with faded curtains, a humming refrigerator, and a single window overlooking a cracked parking lot where old pickup trucks sat beside. Delivery vans. She placed her handbag on the bed, removed the recipe notebook, and carefully laid it beside the lamp as though it were the most valuable possession she owned. Later that evening, while eating crackers from a vending machine with a paper cup of water, Maya noticed an old delivery truck parked beneath a flickering light across the lot. The paint had almost completely peeled away, and a weathered sign still clung to one side, barely revealing the words Southern Kitchen. The truck looked forgotten, but something about it held her attention. She stared through the motel window for several quiet minutes as the yellow parking lot lights reflected against the cracked windshield. Then she opened her notebook again, slowly turned to her grandmother's handwritten recipe for fried chicken, and an unfamiliar feeling settled inside her chest. It was small, fragile, and easy to miss, but after an entire day filled with loss, it was the first spark of possibility she had allowed herself to feel. The following morning arrived wrapped in a blanket of gray clouds, and the parking lot shimmered from a light rain that had fallen just before sunrise. Maya stepped outside carrying a paper cup of motel coffee that tasted more bitter than comforting, yet the cool morning air cleared her thoughts better than the drink ever could. Her eyes drifted back to the weathered delivery truck sitting beneath the same flickering light where it had rested the night before. In daylight, every dent and faded patch of paint became visible. Rust traced the edges of the wheel wells, one side mirror hung slightly crooked, and the tires looked tired from years of carrying someone else's dream. Still, Maya found herself walking toward it. An older man wearing grease-stained coveralls emerged from a nearby repair garage, wiping his hands with a red shop towel. His name patch read Harold. He noticed Maya studying the truck and smiled with quiet understanding. "She has been sitting there almost a year," he said. "Old owner retired. Could never find anyone willing to take a chance on it." Maya slowly circled the truck, running her fingertips across the faded lettering that barely revealed the words Southern Kitchen beneath layers of peeling paint. She could almost hear the echoes of busy lunch hours, happy customers, and engines humming toward county fairs and neighborhood festivals. "Does it still run?" she asked. Harold shrugged with honest uncertainty. "Engine starts. Needs work. The inside needs even more. Most folks only see an old truck. Depends on what you see." Those words lingered in Maya's mind. Most folks only see an old truck. She reached into her handbag and quietly counted the money once more. $300. It suddenly felt less like the measure of her limits and more like the beginning of a decision. Harold explained that the retired owner had simply wanted someone to give the truck another purpose. After a long conversation and several phone calls, the owner agreed to sell it for exactly $300, asking only that whoever bought it promised to keep serving good food. Maya signed the handwritten bill of sale with hands that trembled from equal parts fear and hope. When Harold handed her the worn keys, they felt surprisingly heavy in her palm, as though they carried far more than metal. They carried responsibility. They carried uncertainty. They carried tomorrow. The truck coughed loudly before the engine finally settled into a rough, but steady rhythm. Maya climbed into the driver's seat and inhaled the scent of old vinyl, faded spices, and years of forgotten memories. The kitchen inside looked exhausted. Empty shelves rattled softly whenever the truck idled. The sink leaked. Several cabinet doors refused to close completely. A thin layer of dust coated nearly every surface. Most people would have called it unusable. Maya quietly opened her grandmother's recipe notebook on the small counter beside the serving window. Morning light slipped through the windshield, landing directly across the handwritten pages as though illuminating them for the very first time. She smiled softly and whispered, "We are not starting over. We are simply starting from here." Outside, traffic slowly filled the streets as another ordinary day began for everyone else. Inside the aging truck, a forgotten dream took its first quiet breath. The next several days became a blur of early mornings, borrowed tools, and hands that never seemed to stop moving. Before the sun climbed above the rooftops, Maya was already inside the truck with a bucket of warm water, scrubbing away years of grease and dust one careful stroke at a time. The scent of old cooking oil slowly gave way to fresh soap and clean metal, and every cabinet she repaired felt like reclaiming another small piece of her own confidence. Harold stopped by every afternoon after closing the repair garage, tightening loose bolts, checking electrical wires, and patiently explaining which repairs could wait and which could not. He never spoke to Maya with pity. Instead, he treated her like someone building a business rather than escaping a hardship, and that quiet respect meant more than he realized. Because money had nearly disappeared, every purchase required difficult choices. A new serving tray meant delaying fresh paint. A propane refill meant another week without replacing a cracked storage shelf. Maya walked through discount grocery stores with a calculator in one hand and her grandmother's recipes in the other, comparing prices down to the last few cents. Fresh chicken, potatoes, flour, peaches, onions, herbs, and spices slowly filled the small refrigerator inside the truck. She refused to sacrifice quality, even if it meant eating peanut butter sandwiches herself for several nights. Every evening she tested recipes until the tiny kitchen filled with the comforting aroma of crispy fried chicken, buttery biscuits, slow-cooked collard greens, sweet cornbread, and warm peach cobbler bubbling beneath a golden crust. Sometimes she closed her eyes while stirring a pot, and could almost hear Noah laughing as he stole an extra biscuit from the cooling rack or Lily asking if there was enough cinnamon in the cobbler. Those memories no longer broke her spirit. They reminded her exactly why she refused to quit. One afternoon, she drove the truck to the county health department for its required inspection. The waiting room buzzed with business owners carrying folders, permits, and coffee cups while Maya quietly held her application against her chest. When her turn finally arrived, the inspector examined every corner of the truck with practiced precision. He checked water pressure, food storage temperatures, fire safety equipment, ventilation, and sanitation procedures. Maya answered every question calmly, drawing from years spent in professional kitchens before motherhood had changed her path. After what felt like hours, the inspector signed the final page and handed her the approved permit with a warm smile. "Congratulations," he said. "You are officially ready to serve." Maya stepped outside holding the certificate as sunlight reflected against the clear plastic sleeve protecting the document. It was only a single sheet of paper, yet it felt heavier than any possession she had owned in years because no court, no circumstance, and no setback had given it to her. She had earned it. That evening she parked the truck beside a quiet community park where office workers often stopped on their drive home. She carefully arranged handwritten menu boards, folded clean paper napkins, polished the serving window until it reflected the orange glow of sunset, and switched on the small string of lights she had purchased from a clearance bin. Their gentle warmth shimmered against the freshly cleaned truck, transforming something forgotten into something welcoming. As the last rays of daylight disappeared beyond the trees, Maya stood alone behind the serving counter listening to the soft hum of the engine and the distant sound of passing traffic, waiting for the first customer who could change everything. The first hour passed with little more than the sound of passing cars and the gentle flutter of the handwritten menu taped beside the serving window. Families hurried home after work without slowing down. Office employees glanced toward the truck for a moment before driving away toward familiar restaurants they already trusted. Maya remained standing behind the counter with the same welcoming smile she had practiced in the motel mirror the night before, refusing to let disappointment settle across her face. The fried chicken stayed warm beneath the heat lamps. The biscuits rested inside a clean towel, and the sweet scent of peach cobbler drifted through the cool evening air, yet no one stopped. Just as the sun slipped lower behind the trees, an elderly man wearing worn work boots and a faded baseball cap approached the window. He studied the menu for several quiet seconds before reaching into his pocket and slowly counting a handful of loose coins. His shoulders sank almost immediately. "I guess I came up a little short," he said with an embarrassed smile. "Maybe another day." Maya looked at the coins, then at the tired lines around his eyes. Without saying another word, she placed a plate of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a warm biscuit onto the counter. She added a slice of peach cobbler before sliding the tray toward him. The man looked confused. "Ma'am, I cannot pay for all this." Maya simply smiled. "Then promise me you will enjoy it." The man hesitated before accepting the meal with quiet gratitude. He chose a nearby picnic table, bowed his head for a brief moment, and slowly took the first bite. A peaceful smile crossed his face that reminded Maya of her grandfather after Sunday dinners. She returned to the truck and continued waiting. Nearly another hour passed before a young delivery driver pulled into the parking lot. He had noticed the elderly man eating and decided to give the new truck a chance. He ordered a chicken sandwich and sweet tea, then smiled after the very first bite. Before leaving, he quietly took a photograph of the meal with his phone and thanked Maya for the friendly service. She did not think much of it. Closing time arrived with only 4 customers served. After paying for ingredients, fuel, and the parking permit, Maya counted the day's earnings beneath the warm glow of the serving light. She had made less than $40. The small stack of bills looked painfully thin resting beside the recipe notebook. For a brief moment, doubt crept into her thoughts. She wondered how many days like this she could survive before the little money she had left disappeared completely. As she prepared to drive back to the motel, the truck suddenly shuddered. The engine sputtered once, twice, and then fell silent. Maya tried turning the key again. Nothing happened except a tired clicking sound beneath the dashboard. She rested both hands on the steering wheel and closed her eyes. The parking lot had become almost completely empty, and the evening breeze carried the distant laughter of families gathering for dinner while she sat alone beneath the soft string lights she had hung with so much hope. Then a pair of headlights slowly turned into the lot. Harold climbed out of his pickup carrying a toolbox in one hand. He looked at the silent truck, then at Maya's expression, and smiled the same steady smile he always carried. "Looks like tomorrow is asking us not to give up tonight," he said as he rolled up his sleeves and walked toward the engine. Harold worked beneath the raised hood long after the last car had disappeared from the parking lot. A small work light cast a warm circle across the engine while crickets filled the silence beyond the edge of the pavement. Maya sat on the truck's front step, wrapped in a light sweater, holding a paper cup that had long since gone cold. Neither of them spoke very much. Some evenings did not need conversation. They only needed someone willing to stay. After tightening the final connection, Harold lowered the hood with a gentle tap and wiped his hands on the same faded red shop towel he always carried. "She will get you home tonight," he said with a tired smile. "Tomorrow she will ask for more work, but so will every good dream." Maya thanked him quietly, knowing there was no way to repay the kindness he had shown her except by making sure his faith had not been misplaced. Once the truck was parked back at the motel, she switched off the engine and remained sitting behind the steering wheel. The dashboard lights faded one by one until only the glow from the parking lot lamps reflected through the windshield. Rain began falling softly again, each drop tapping against the roof like slow, patient footsteps. She reached for the recipe notebook and opened it to a page she had never noticed before. Tucked between recipes for cornbread and peach preserves was a short handwritten sentence from her grandmother. "People may forget what they lost, but they never forget how you made them feel when they needed hope." Maya traced the faded ink with her fingertips. Her grandmother had never owned a restaurant. She had never appeared on television. She had never become wealthy. Yet people from the neighborhood still spoke about her dinners decades later because she had served more than food. She had served comfort. That realization settled gently inside Maya's heart. She had spent the past several weeks trying to prove that she could rebuild her life. Maybe she had been asking the wrong question all along. Success was never supposed to be about proving someone else wrong. It was supposed to be about becoming someone her children could always be proud of, no matter how long it took. She reached into her bag and removed the family photograph that had traveled with her since leaving the courthouse. Noah's smile looked exactly the way she remembered after scoring his first soccer goal. Lily's eyes sparkled with the excitement of missing front teeth and birthday balloons. Maya smiled back at them through the picture. "I am coming," she whispered into the quiet truck. "Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but I am building something worthy of finding you again." She placed the photograph beside the recipe notebook and looked through the windshield as the rain slowly washed streaks of dust from the truck's faded hood. Under the parking lot lights, the old paint seemed almost new for just a moment. The world around her remained quiet. No customers waited outside. No reporters stood nearby. No applause filled the night. There was only the steady rhythm of falling rain, the faint smell of warm bread still lingering inside the kitchen, and the peaceful certainty that some victories began long before anyone else could see them. Maya leaned back, closed her eyes for a brief moment, and when she opened them again, the fear that had followed her since the courthouse steps no longer occupied the driver's seat. Determination did. The next morning began like every other since Maya had opened the little truck, with quiet determination instead of certainty. Steam rose gently from fresh biscuits as sunlight spilled across the serving counter, turning the polished metal into soft ribbons of gold. She greeted each customer with the same warmth whether they bought a full meal or only a cup of coffee. By lunchtime, several familiar faces had returned. The elderly man in the faded baseball cap brought 2 retired friends. The delivery driver smiled as he ordered the chicken sandwich again, mentioning that he had been thinking about it all week. Maya thanked each of them by name, remembering their favorite sides without asking twice. Business remained modest, but something invisible had begun to change. People were no longer stopping because they happened to drive by. They were coming because someone they trusted had told them there was a woman serving food that tasted like home. Late that afternoon, a young woman carrying a camera over one shoulder stepped up to the window. She introduced herself as Emily Foster, a travel writer and food content creator who spent weekends searching for hidden local restaurants. She explained that one of her followers had insisted she try the fried chicken before visiting anywhere else in town. Maya smiled politely, unaware that the simple photograph taken days earlier had quietly spread across neighborhood social media pages. Emily ordered the full plate, found a picnic table beneath a maple tree, and began recording short clips of the meal while describing the aromas drifting through the warm spring air. She cut into the biscuit first, pausing for a moment before laughing softly to herself. Then she tasted the chicken, closed her eyes, and lowered the fork with genuine surprise. She was not performing for the camera anymore. She was simply enjoying lunch. Curious customers glanced toward her as she continued filming the cobbler, the truck, and finally Maya herself, who was carefully wrapping an order for a construction worker with the same attention she gave every customer. Emily walked back to the serving window and asked a simple question. "Who taught you to cook like this?" Maya looked down at the weathered recipe notebook resting beside the register. "My grandmother taught me recipes," she answered with a gentle smile. "Life taught me why they matter." Emily nodded without saying another word. There was honesty in that answer that no script could improve. Before leaving, she thanked Maya again and promised to share the experience with her audience. Maya returned to work without giving it much thought. She had learned not to expect miracles from ordinary conversations. That evening, after closing, she parked outside the motel as usual and prepared a simple dinner for herself inside the quiet truck. While washing dishes, her phone vibrated against the counter. Then it vibrated again and again. Messages continued appearing one after another from numbers she did not recognize. Harold called only moments later, excitement filling his usually calm voice. "Maya," he said, almost laughing, "you need to look at your phone right now." She dried her hands, unlocked the screen, and stared in disbelief. Emily's short video had already gathered hundreds of thousands of views in only a few hours. Thousands of comments praised the food, the kindness behind every meal, and the quiet woman who had smiled through every order without telling anyone how much she had overcome. As the numbers continued climbing before her eyes, Maya looked through the windshield toward the old truck resting beneath the motel lights. For the first time since leaving the courthouse, opportunity was no longer walking slowly toward her. It was racing in her direction. By the end of the week, the quiet parking lot that had once echoed with empty afternoons looked completely different. Cars lined both sides of the street before the truck even opened each morning. Office workers arrived carrying reusable coffee cups, while families waited patiently beneath the shade of the maple tree, chatting with strangers who had driven from neighboring towns after watching Emily Foster's video. The scent of fresh biscuits, roasted chicken, and cinnamon drifted through the crisp morning air, blending with laughter and conversations that had never existed there before. Maya moved from one order to the next with calm confidence, greeting returning customers by name even as the line stretched farther than she had ever imagined. Harold often stood nearby during the busiest hours, helping refill propane tanks or carrying extra supplies from his pickup, smiling every time another customer complimented the food. One afternoon, Emily returned with a small television production crew. A regional morning program had invited Maya to share the story behind the little truck that had captured so many hearts online. Maya almost declined. She had never wanted attention. She had only wanted another chance to build an honest life. Harold quietly reminded her that sometimes people needed hope just as much as they needed lunch. A few days later, Maya stood beneath bright studio lights wearing the same simple apron she had worn since opening day. The host welcomed viewers before asking how everything had begun. Maya smiled gently and answered with the same honesty that had guided every decision she had made. She spoke about recipes passed down through generations, about serving every customer with dignity, and about believing that kindness always found its way back, even if it traveled the long road first. She never mentioned the courtroom. She never blamed anyone for what she had lost. Instead, she thanked the people who had believed in a forgotten truck and an ordinary woman trying to start again. Hundreds of miles away, Ethan Collins sat in his living room sorting paperwork while the television played quietly in the background. Noah and Lily were building a puzzle on the rug when Lily suddenly froze, pointing excitedly toward the screen. "Daddy," she whispered. "That is Mom." Ethan looked up almost absent-mindedly, then slowly lowered the papers in his hands. There she was, smiling with quiet confidence behind the familiar serving window of the truck. The audience applauded as the host introduced her as a local business owner whose story had inspired millions of viewers across the country. Noah moved closer to the television until he was almost standing against it. His eyes never left the screen. "She still makes the biscuits," he said softly. "The ones she made every Saturday." Lily smiled through bright eyes. "I told you she would be okay." Ethan remained completely still. He remembered the courthouse steps, the old handbag, the $300, and the certainty with which he had believed her future had already been decided. Now the woman he had underestimated was speaking to an entire nation without bitterness, without resentment, and without forgetting the values that had always defined her. The room felt strangely quiet after the interview ended. Noah looked toward his father with hopeful eyes. "Can we go see Mom's food truck this weekend?" Ethan did not answer right away. He simply looked back at the television where Maya's smile still lingered on the screen, realizing that while he had been measuring success by possessions and legal victories, she had quietly built something far greater, one meal, one customer, and one act of kindness at a time. Morning sunlight poured across the little food truck as if it had always belonged there. The line of customers stretched beyond the maple tree, yet the atmosphere felt unhurried because everyone who reached the serving window was greeted with the same gentle smile that had become Maya's signature. Fresh biscuits cooled on wire racks beside bubbling peach cobbler, while the comforting aroma of seasoned chicken drifted through the neighborhood like an invitation home. Near lunchtime, a familiar SUV rolled slowly into the parking lot and stopped several spaces away. Maya noticed it through the serving window, but continued preparing the order in front of her without hesitation. When the last customer stepped aside, Noah and Lily climbed out first. Before either child spoke, Maya had already opened the serving window and walked around the truck. Noah ran into her arms with the kind of joyful certainty that only children possess. Lily wrapped both arms around her mother's waist, laughing through happy tears as the three of them stood together beneath the warm spring sun. For a long moment, no one said anything at all. The breeze carried the scent of fresh bread while the string lights hanging along the truck swayed gently overhead. Ethan approached more slowly, his hands folded in front of him, looking less like the confident man who had walked away from the courthouse months earlier and more like someone finally willing to listen. "I owe you an apology," he said, quietly. "Not because you became successful, because I stopped seeing who you already were." Maya looked at him calmly. There was no anger left in her expression, only the quiet wisdom earned through difficult days and patient nights. "We both made mistakes," she answered softly. "The important thing is what our children learn from us next." Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment before nodding. There was nothing else to argue about because kindness had already spoken louder than pride ever could. The children spent the afternoon helping inside the truck exactly as they had years before in the family kitchen. Noah proudly carried napkins to waiting customers, while Lily carefully placed homemade cookies into paper bags with complete concentration. Every customer smiled at the small family working together, unaware they were witnessing something far greater than a successful business. They were watching trust slowly find its way home. As the afternoon crowd faded, Harold quietly walked over carrying a small wooden sign wrapped in brown paper. He handed it to Maya without ceremony. She gently removed the paper and smiled as tears brightened her eyes. Across the smooth oak surface were simple engraved words that read, "Everyone deserves a second chance." Harold grinned. "I figured the truck finally found the right name." Maya hung the sign beside the serving window where every customer could see it. Nobody applauded. Nobody needed to. The message spoke for itself. Months later, the old truck had become the first of several locations, each one serving the same recipes from Evelyn Brooks's notebook and the same belief that every person deserved to be welcomed with dignity. Yet Maya kept the original truck polished and running because it reminded her where hope had first taken shape. Sometimes visitors asked whether the story they had seen on television was really true. Maya would simply smile, hand them a warm biscuit, and say, "Good things can grow from very small beginnings." As evening settled across the parking lot, the final rays of sunlight reflected softly against the weathered hood that once looked forgotten. Children laughed nearby, customers carried dinners home to their families, and the old string lights flickered on one by one. Maya stood beside the serving window with Noah and Lily close at her side, breathing in the familiar scent of fresh bread and spring air. The courthouse had taken away a house, a vehicle, and the life she thought she knew. It never had the power to take away her courage, her compassion, or the gift she carried in her hands. In the quiet that followed another ordinary day, those proved to be the only things that had truly mattered all along.